In this video, we're going to talk about why it's so important that you make your lessons as engaging as possible for your students. And I've got two quick stories to tell you. The first goes back to when I was actually studying to be a teacher, when I was on a PGCE course down in Brighton in the UK. And we had a fantastic lecturer. He was absolutely superb. He was our course leader. And one day we came into our lecture and the whole room had changed. It was all laid out in exam conditions. All the seats and tables were in rows. On each table we had our own name and we had materials laid out. All the pens, pencils, rulers, rubbers were laid out ready for us. And there was an exam paper, what looked like an exam paper, sitting face down on the table. And our course leader came to the front of the room and he said, "Listen, before you sit down, I just want to tell you what's going on. We've had an inquiry from a company called Star Education and they want to use you as guinea pigs to pilot a new exam which they're going to put out across the board for all the PGCE trainees if it goes well. You lot have been working really hard and we were hoping that you'd take part in the test. Is that okay?" And we were like, yeah, we thought it was a privilege. So, fools. So we went and we sat down in our allocated seats and then this lady came to the front of the room. She had big shoulder pads on and she had those horn-rimmed spectacles and a fixed frown. And she took the front of the room and she said, "Right, I'm Mrs. So-and-so from Star Education and I'm going to give you 30 minutes to complete the exam. When I say go, you can turn your papers over and you can begin." Okay, away you go. Now, you turned your paper over and it was one of those classic moments. It took you right back to doing exams at school, you know, where you scour the paper and you're trying to find one question that you can answer, your one saving grace that's going to get you at least 1 mark. And there just wasn't one. These questions were just tying my head in knots. They were just so difficult, so hard to understand. I just couldn't fathom them at all. They just defied all logic. And I'm there stewing away looking at my paper, and then as I started to look around the room, I could see that everyone else was struggling as well. We were all having a really hard time with these papers. And for about 5 minutes, people were glancing around the room, looking at each other. And then occasionally somebody would just sit back in the chair, "I'm not doing it." And somebody else would just slam their pen down. And after about 10 minutes, frustration was rising. You've got some people pushing the paper to the floor. You've got people chatting. One person even screwed it up in a ball, chucked it across the room. Quite a few of us were very vocal. I tend to have a big mouth and I was complaining. I was making my voice heard. Rather bizarrely, there was one girl in the corner of the room who was writing away furiously, which made it even more bizarre and quite worrying for the rest of us. The whole room just eventually descended into chaos, and after about 20 minutes of this, our course leader came to the front and he brought the lady with him and he said, okay, you can put your pens down. He said, I'll let you into a secret. This lady is actually my wife. And she took her jacket off and she took her glasses off and she smiled for the first time since being in the room. And he said, "Listen, you've been part of a very, very important test. You now know what it's like to be students in a classroom when you can't understand the work. Or you now know what it's like to be students in a mainstream classroom when you have special educational needs." Wow, it hit us so hard. It was so obvious. All the telltale behaviours were there. Here we were, professionals, trainee teachers, and we were behaving like kids in a classroom. We were scrumpling paper up and throwing it around the room. Some people were walking out, people were talking, people were just laughing, people were refusing to work, some people putting their head down. One lady, I forgot to say, was actually in tears. All those behaviours that drive you mad in the classroom were there to see. And it was all because the work was too difficult, too frustrating, too confusing. Now, the second story I wanted to tell you is the other end of the scale. When I was working in a pupil referral unit for students who'd been thrown out of mainstream school because they could not behave properly, most of our day was taken up with trying to get students to behave, to sit in a seat and do some work. Remember, I was talking about the amount of time you spend dealing with behaviour in your classroom. And for us, it was 1 hour out of every hour dealing with just behaviour. Very little learning taking place other than learning social skills and learning how to behave. Now, we were approached by a company who wanted to come in and put on a display in the hall of animals and various creatures from around the world, various exotic reptiles and different creatures. And they came in and they set up in the hall ready for us to take the students through and to see their display. And they were going to run a session for 1 hour. and the students were going to be able to ask questions and take part. And we were dreading it. We were thinking, oh God, this is going to be just bedlam. They're going to be throwing stuff around and shouting and screaming. We'll have to take them out. It's only going to last 5 minutes, because that's how things normally went in their lessons. Now, one lady was stood at the door to the hall, and she was stood holding a huge rat, and she was stroking it like this. As we took our kids out of the classrooms, and they're shouting and screaming and pushing and shoving and doing the usual stuff, and she's there at the door going, and their behaviour changed in an instant. Suddenly they straightened up and they nudged each other. Whoa, whoa, what's that? What's going on? They went into the hall and they all sat down, and for 1 hour they were completely mesmerised by what was going on. There was no room on their hard drive for naughtiness. All their attention was taken up with what was going on in this display. They were asking questions politely and appropriately. They were taking part. They were getting out of their seats properly and carefully looking at these animals up close. They were answering questions about the animals' feeding habits and habitats. It was incredible to see, and we looked at each other, all our colleagues looked at each other, what's going on? Normally, 100% of our time is spent focusing on behaviour, and here there were no behaviour problems for 1 hour, bar one student. We did have to take one student out because he couldn't keep it together, but he was desperate to get back in the room. He wanted to be in the lesson. Now, these were kids with extreme behaviour problems, and yet there wasn't a problem to deal with. The activity, the lesson, was taking care of the behaviour for us. Now, I'm not suggesting we can go around with spiders, tarantulas, huge millipedes, these giant snails that come from Africa like this lady had. I'm not saying we can go around every lesson and have this kind of thing. We can't make every lesson all bells and whistles. But the message is that if you can make your lessons engaging for your students and more appealing for your students, you'll have less time to focus on behaviour. You'll have less need to deal with behaviour problems. So making your lessons engaging makes your job easier. Now, we're going to spend the rest of this module looking at ways you can do this, and I'll also explain what this picture's all about. Okay.